Welcome back to Let's Make a Game. In this video I would like to review another game book, and this time I will be reviewing Narnia Solo Game number 1, Return to Deathwater by Curtis Norris from 1988. As with the other game books I've been reviewing, I got this from the archive.org gamebooks collection, and I will link to that in the description if you don't, or in case you don't already know where to find it. You can download various old game books for free in PDF form. So Narnia is a series of fantasy books aimed at children, written by C.S. Lewis, largely as sort of Christian apologetics or Christian, you would say propaganda, but in the neutral sense. He wrote them trying to convince children to convert to Christianity, essentially. But they are very well regarded. They're probably sort of one of the major English fantasy series of the 20th century. I read them as a child and I completely missed the religious element. I read them again later as an adult and was amazed by how much religious stuff was in there that I hadn't noticed. But anyway, they revolve around children from Britain, in fact, specifically children from England, who are sent to the sort of parallel universe of Narnia, or which includes the Kingdom of Narnia, and interact with, in particular, Aslan, who is basically the form that Jesus takes in this other universe, essentially. Lewis said that his idea was that the symbolism, I'm paraphrasing here, but he seemed to think that the symbolism of Christianity had become ineffective by repetition, and it had become associated with sort of people's experience of Sunday school or being bored at church, etc., etc., and that if this symbolism was presented anew in a fresh way, then it would sort of regain what he believed was its sort of objective power. So, for example, the idea of Jesus being a lion is not something that he made up. That was something that he got, I'm not sure exactly from where, but the idea of Jesus being the Lion of Judah is an existing sort of symbolic idea. The world of Narnia is a sort of fairy tale world, I suppose, or a combination of sort of fairy tales and medievalism with a lot of religion and a lot of sort of love of sort of formal, very formal language. One of the really striking parts of the book is that the kings and queens of Narnia, including human children who stay in Narnia and become kings and queens, often speak in a very unnatural, formal sort of way. In the first book, the bit that I remember is that one of the human children, after having stayed in Narnia for 20 years, says, "Cousin, it is the same with us also," meaning, yes, I feel the same way. There's also a group of people that are analogous to Ottoman Turks, basically, who have their own sort of very formal, poetic way of speaking. So they say, "The sun appeared dark in my eyes," is their sort of go-to way of saying I was very depressed or I was unhappy or something. and the Calamine court address each other by saying, "Oh, my father," and "Oh, the delight of my eyes," before they say anything, or "Oh, my son," and "Oh, the delight of my eyes." So that is the books. I mean, the real reason that you would be playing this particular gamebook series would probably be that you read Narnia and you sort of wanted to see if these books capture the flavour of Narnia. And I would say that they do so quite well. This is an American production. It seems to come from Iron Crown Enterprises, who are I'm not sure if they still exist, but they were a role-playing game company. And they're using trademarks of Episcopal Radio TV Foundation, Inc. The Episcopalian Church is the Anglican Church in the United States, so I assume either maybe C.S. Lewis left the copyrights to them or his family sold the copyrights to that institution and then they licensed it to Iron Crown. So it's an American role-playing game company. So they're not going to be really familiar with the sort of the language that C.S. Lewis uses. And yes, they're going to be familiar with fantasy, certainly, but Narnia is not vanilla fantasy. It's a very specific take on that sort of thing from before there really was a genre of fantasy. It's, as I say, quite fairy tale-like, quite medieval, extremely Christian, very interested in poetic language. I think they did well. They didn't capture the poetic language, unfortunately. The kings more or less speak in sort of formal... they speak more like a person from the modern world speaking formally, I suppose, as opposed to speaking like a character from... I'm not sure exactly where it comes from, but it seems like maybe a character in a chivalric romance or something, or a very poetical Victorian translation of some medieval, troubadour song or something like that. But they got the atmosphere pretty good. There's nothing in the text that makes me think, oh, this was made by Americans. I'm Australian, so I don't sort of quite know British culture from a native point of view, but I guess I would say that Australian popular culture is much more English than American popular culture is. What I mean by that is we get a lot more American TV. We get a lot more English TV than Americans seem to. We grow up reading a lot more English books than Americans seem to. And I think they did pretty well. It feels like Narnia. The overall plot is the same in the sense that it's a child who's friends with one of the characters from the books who's gone to Narnia and hears about Narnia from that character. And the character, the player character, the person that you're being, gets transported to Narnia and has this mission where they're trying to find out something from an island that's sort of briefly mentioned in one of the books. I think it's mentioned in Voyage of the Dawn Treader, which is one about a sort of a magical sea journey, I suppose. And it has a similar atmosphere to that. The art is good. The illustrations for the Narnia books are very distinctive, and it seems to me like the person was sort of going for that style, who did the art, and they do a pretty good job. It's not vanilla fantasy art. It's not just it feels like they made an effort to specifically evoke Narnia. It would have been easy enough to go, right, castles, monsters, dwarves, gotcha. We'll just use, we know what all that is. But I don't know. It's somehow different. The visual language is quite different in a way that I'm not sure what um, I'm not sure what the difference is. I think maybe often vanilla fantasy art, if I can call it that, is trying to be it's trying to present something horrible, I suppose. It's trying if you do a troll, you want the troll to look horrible. You want to emphasize its slavering jaws and its sharp teeth. Whereas the artwork for Narnia, it seems like it's trying to be beautiful, perhaps. And it's maybe a bit stylized. It kind of feels a little bit like it could be on a medieval tapestry or something like that. So I think they got the artist got Narnia, I think. It feels like either they had read Narnia themselves and kind of understood what they were going for, or at least they got good direction from whoever told them, told them what to draw, sort of thing. There's a very nice map in the front, which doesn't have any part in the story. Later books in this series do use a map as part of the game, but this one's fairly straightforward. You have the system's pretty good. You have 6 attributes, and you distribute bonuses amongst them. There's a slightly weird system where if you have 6 points and you have 6 attributes, and you can just give 1 point to every attribute, or you can put 2 points in a given attribute. But if you do that, that means another attribute has no points, but it doesn't have no points, it has -2 points. There's like a special penalty if you don't use the all-round character. So having an all-round character with +1 in everything is sort of mechanically better. But if you want a specialized character, which is what I did, you end up with with some penalties for that. I guess that's probably, if you're playing the game more than once, that would probably be cancelled out by the fact that you'd probably know what was coming, and so you'd put points into the ones that you knew you were going to roll, I guess. So maybe that's why they did that. But it's a pretty good system. It's of about the right amount of complexity that I want in a game book. There is no combat system. There is violence in Narnia, but it's not. Even the children do kill a few times in the books, but it's not quite as combat heavy. The stories are very much not as combat heavy, actually, as perhaps the Adventures of Conan might be, for example. And there's a lot more because Lewis is trying to convert you to Christianity. He's trying to preach, essentially. He's trying to sort of teach you, a child, how to be a good person. So there's a little bit more concern given to the morality of killing, at least. And that's quite striking in a game book, because normally, let's say you've snuck into the dwarves' lair and you see the gold cup that you want. Are you going to steal it, or are you going to leap out and attack the dwarves, or are you going to try and negotiate with them? Let's say that's a choice that you're given. Normally that's not a moral choice. Normally that's just a choice of, well, is my sneak score good, or do I have a spell that lets me be invisible? Do I have some sort of have I picked up this item of pepper which I can throw in their faces if they discover me, and therefore, it's a sort of tactical question. In Narnia, it sort of should be a moral question as well. There's not a lot of that came up in this particular run of the game, but I remember playing this same game, and there's a bit where you do get the option to steal something from a monster. But if you do that from memory, then later on, the king says, "Oh, well, that was very wrong. You shouldn't have stolen from that." And you go, "Oh yeah, that's right. It's a Narnia book. I'm not meant to be a wandering thief. Basically, I'm meant to be trying to be a good person." So as a game, it's quite easy. I didn't win. I didn't sort of have complete victory. I didn't do everything that you're supposed to do, but I did most of the things that you're supposed to do. And I feel like probably most people would. It feels like maybe they don't want you to die. I'd probably have to play it a couple more times to be sure of that. And that's book accurate. Like none of the children who go to Narnia end up dying. People die in the books, and people get turned to stone for 1,000 years and blah blah blah. But yeah, the children sort of make it through. So maybe they felt like, well, we want to be like the Narnia books, so therefore the children, the child character, should sort of be alive at the end of the book. But I also feel like children are okay with dying and then trying again, sort of thing. Like I think children would probably think, well, if I died 3 times and succeeded, if they thought about canonicity, I mean, obviously 12-year-olds don't think about canonicity, but I think they'd probably think of it as, well, the one where I got through and won is sort of the one that really happened. You know what I mean? Like, I think they'd feel like, well, I failed, but I get to try again. Yes, I drowned in this run of the book, but I get to try again, sort of thing. So I feel like they could have had death, even though the child protagonists don't die in the books. I feel like they could have had the danger of you dying in this game book, and I don't think that would have undermined the Narnian-ness of it. Perhaps what are they called? Episcopal Radio TV Foundation Inc. Maybe they said you can't have anyone die in the books, because of course one would imagine that Iron Crown Enterprises, because they're coming from a role-playing game background, their assumption would probably be, well, yeah, you put in you roll a die, and if you don't make the die, you drown, or whatever. I want to talk about the things that happen in the book, but I know that would spoil it. But there's at least a couple of things that happen in the book that feel very Narnian. So yeah, I think that they got it right. There's a couple of I don't think it's too much to say. There's a couple of bits of divine intervention. Aslan sort of has a guiding hand in what happens. That's very, very true to the books. A lot of the time, from my memory of reading the series, a lot of them seem to end with Aslan saying, "Yeah, I was responsible for everything that happened to you. This was all basically a test. You were basically running through a maze, which I was controlling. You were the rat in the maze." He doesn't put it that way, of course, but which I guess fits how C.S. Lewis saw the world. I mean, his whole point, I guess, was that life is a test that God is overseeing, and it's up to us to sort of do the thing that God wants, because it's the right thing, and also we will be rewarded for doing it. Yeah, so I remember one incident where they're attacked by a lion, and one of the characters gets clawed on the back, and at the end of the book, Aslan says, "Yes, that's because you didn't care about your servant getting whipped, and the marks that I gave you are exactly the marks that the servant got." There's nothing like that in this game book. Aslan doesn't turn up. He lends a hand a couple of times, but he doesn't turn up in person at the end of the book, which is a very Narnian thing to happen. But that doesn't happen in all the books. Excuse me. It doesn't happen in all the books, so it's not like that's a core part of the a core trope that they needed to have. There is one part where there are rather too many tunnels. There's a bit where you're going to end up in some underground tunnels, and there's, for my money, rather too many tunnels and rather too little stuff happening in those tunnels. But it is reasonably brief. It's only it's only a few, but I feel like if you were doing a second pass at this, maybe have a look at that and maybe get through that tunnel bit a bit more quickly. There's a lot of it's quite large. I think it's actually larger than 400 entries. I'll just look at how much it is actually. Sorry, maybe this is going to take too long. Yep, there are 400 and looks like there's 449 entries, which is quite a lot. They're usually they seem to be shorter perhaps than in Fighting Fantasy. Yeah, maybe on the whole I'd say they're a little bit shorter than in Fighting Fantasy, but you get a good long go. They didn't skimp on the size of it. And yet the adventure seemed quite short. It seemed very short compared to a Fighting Fantasy book. So that suggests to me that this is there's a lot of options. There's a lot of ways you can go, but each way is fairly short. Whereas Fighting Fantasy books tend to have a fairly long main narrative, and the branches don't go too far off the main narrative, if that makes sense. So neither of those are better. I mean, that's not a better or worse thing. I think they're both fine. They're both different. They're just different ways of doing it. But yeah, bear that in mind. It'll be fairly short. It won't take you as long to get through as a Fighting Fantasy. I got through this mostly successfully, and it was very quick. So whether that's a positive or a negative, I don't know. I think that's all I have to say about it, mate. It's basically good. There are a few things that I would have changed. I would have had a few more character deaths, and maybe add a bit of courtly language. Maybe they just felt, look, I can't do that well, so I'm not going to do it. That's fair enough. But that is sort of my favourite part of Narnia. That particular bit with the tunnels, maybe cut that down. But yeah, on the whole, they did a really good job of something that's, I think, harder. It's easier to write your own game book in some ways because you can't get your own world wrong. Whereas they could have gotten Narnia wrong. They could have done a game book that was quite a good game book, but it wasn't Narnia. If you snuck up behind someone and stabbed them in the back, and that's how you escape, that wouldn't have been Narnian. But they avoided sort of normal fantasy game book isms that would have wouldn't have worked well in a what was meant to be a Narnia book. So this is pretty good. This is probably the best one that I've read of this series, and I may come back to this series if I once I do a few others. I may come back to this one and do further ones. I do think it was at least greatly aided by having read Narnia. I think a lot of it was like, oh yes, I remember Narnia. This is a sort of familiar thing. So if you didn't read them, and if you didn't read them as a kid, maybe it would sort of leave you a bit cold. But for someone who has read the books, I think it's pretty good. They don't spoil it. They don't sort of fail to understand it or fail to get the atmosphere. So I hope that was useful or interesting to at least some of you, and I hope you will tune in next time.